Good afternoon. This is a study session to discuss regional emergency planning as a work session. There's no agenda, no minutes will be published, no decisions will be made. This is purely informative and discussion just to familiarize the commissioners with what's new, different, and some of the thoughts from our OEM. So with that, I'll turn it over to Shane.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for everyone for your attendance today. Mr. Tim Gablehouse is our subject matter expert today who's driven down. Greatly appreciate your attendance and presenting on this information. I've met Mr. Tim Gablehouse a couple years back. Aaron has also met him last year at what's called the Local Emergency Planning Commission Conference, which takes place annually in October up in Breckenridge. It was a great opportunity to learn about emergency planning commissions, its role here in the state, both at the state level, local level, federal, etc. I'm excited about the information that Tim's going to be able to provide to us. He comes to us from Gablehouse and Granberg, LLC, and his practices focus on environmental compliance, emergency planning, and corrective action projects. He also is a member of the Colorado Emergency Planning Commission and chairs the Jefferson County Local Emergency Planning Commission. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mr. Gablehouse.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Happy to be here. I'm not going to take a ton of time, but what this is about is a federal law called the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act. Sorry. I always get messed up depending on the sensitivity of these things. The Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act was passed back in the late 80s. And it was an outgrowth of a big chemical accident incident in Bhopal, India, and a similar one that took place in Institute, West Virginia, where you had the release of a large plume of toxic gas. Community was unaware, unprepared. You probably had better part of 25,000 people killed in India, and another couple hundred that were exposed and hospitalized in West Virginia. It is a non-regulatory program. It is very much based on trying to educate, provide enough information for local communities so you can do adequate community preparedness. It's very much focused on getting enough information in the hands of first responders and emergency planners so that you can anticipate what events might occur, plan appropriately, protect first responders' lives, educate neighbors and others as to what the potential hazards are. So what LEPCs are very much about is gathering risk information. That is based on a series of lists that EPA has prepared and thresholds. But all of that really is in the hands of the local emergency planning committee, who can vary the requests that are being made, the quantity of chemicals they want to see reported, and the nature of the chemicals they want to see reported. And honestly, what we find across the state and what I find across the country is that LEPCs tend very much to focus on what the current capabilities are of the first responders, what the education and awareness is within the community about the chemical hazards, because what we want to be able to do is empower community members to protect themselves, their families, their property. Everybody goes home. So it is that kind of program. In Colorado, the policy of the commission, and I've served on this commission now since the early 90s, the policy is to have LEPCs be very active in all hazards planning, primarily because of their information gathering capabilities. The statute says that an LEPC can ask for any information that's relevant to emergency planning, which is a pretty big universe, as you might imagine. But again, we're not telling any facility or anybody else what they can do, what they can't do, what chemicals it can have. You know, this is not a fire code or something like that. I mean, it is basically what do you got so that we can plan? Do we have protective equipment for these chemicals? Do we have the ability to detect them in the air? Knowing what kind of capabilities exist on fire trucks, and very particularly the awareness of neighbors. we live in a society today where there are unreasonable expectations on first responders. There is a sense that immediate rescue and relief is going to happen. If you punch 911, it's going to be the Chicago Fire Department showing up, which of course is not real even in urban areas, and is most certainly not true in rural areas, where there has to be some sense of self-reliance. People have to have enough awareness of the hazards to understand what steps to take. It's very much like going to shelter in tornado country. So, if you're back in Oklahoma City and the siren goes off, people are going to ground right now because they understand that risk clearly. Same kind of thing. If we see a truck roll over, explosion, fire, things like that coming from the facility, what you want people to do is protect themselves rather than run towards it with their cell phones so they can take pictures. So we want to improve that. It's very important for LEPCs to be working on community engagement. It is impossible for any emergency management group to do enough to involve all the various segments of the community. And by various segments of the community, I'm really focused on the most vulnerable segments of the community. Who are we talking about in terms of non-English speaking? People with mobility issues, people that aren't able to evacuate, people that are low income, not aware, they don't get the code red warnings, they don't have internet access. We have large population of folks across the state in every county where you have population areas where you have underserved folks that are not going to be privy to alerts and warnings or have the ability to act on them. So we want LEPCs to work with emergency management to engage the community very broadly. LEPC is a tool for emergency management to talk to the faith-based groups and other organizations within the county to get them involved in preparedness and planning for their own good. We're going to measure success in these efforts by evaluating how we fill capability gaps. And I don't mean capability gaps that require writing checks for the fire department to buy stuff. I'm talking about awareness, capability kinds of gaps that flow from just lack of knowledge, education, and awareness. Okay? Do we have basic first aid skills, for example? Lots of places in the state, you do not. We used to teach a lot of first aid. Elementary school, junior high, high school, stuff like that. We don't do that very much anymore, depending on where you are. So there's a lot of things that we used to take for granted in terms of what the public would do in the face of emergency that are pretty unrealistic these days. So a lot of emergency managers use LEPCs to help them engage, hold meetings, have conversations. Because LEPCs are not regulatory, they are not making funding decisions, they're not writing checks, although they can attract grants, which can help fund this stuff. They're very much about creating a nice neutral forum where folks can talk about what the risks are in the community, what the capabilities are, and have really a realistic visit so that we don't have segments of the community making assumptions on what kinds of services exist when they're just not real, when they're not real. I do a lot of these kind of study sessions in rural areas, and it's always quite entertaining to get the new businesses that moved in that aren't really very familiar with the community, don't understand what the emergency services are like. Talk to them about what they're going to do if they end up with an employee hurt, small dose of chemicals in the eyes or something. And they'll stammer around, but ultimately they'll say, well, I call 911. And then you ask them, what do you expect to have happen when you call 911? And you will get a description that is grossly out of touch with reality. And you'll look at the fire chief or emergency services folks and say, what really happens? And, especially over in the Western Slope areas, you get a conversation that goes like, well, if Mary Jane can close the salon and go get the fire truck, she can pick up Sue, and it'll take 20 minutes to get 2 people and a dog and a fire extinguisher. Okay, so obviously we have a real huge gap in understanding what the capabilities are. LEPCs are a really good place to have that conversation, that dose of reality, so that everybody's sort of on the same page. The federal government, in order to recognize the fact that we have this meeting of the minds problem with the expectations, organized what they call hazmat roundtables. They've been running these for years now. And they invite a lot of people to them. I get invited because of my role as board member of a national organization that represents LEPCs and the state circs. Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration is part of the Department of Transportation. They regulate all things hazardous materials transportation. If it's got a placard on it or a pipeline or whatever, they are the regulatory agency at the federal level for that. EPA, of course, participates, and the International Association of Fire Chiefs usually hosts and facilitates these meetings. Coming out of the last couple of years of these meetings and continuing into the one that will happen here in May, there's a real understanding that if you don't have a locally based awareness and planning program that understands what the risks and the capability gaps are, you have a serious problem, because we're putting all the pressure on the first responders to be perfect, which of course is unrealistic. We tend to, the problem with the public is they tend to measure whether or not the first responders are any good based on the last bad day, which of course you don't control. You don't have any say on where it happens, what it is, when it happens. So every time you see a fairly major incident, be a natural hazard or hazardous materials incident, there's always 20/20 based second guessing. The Marshall Fire up in Boulder, there's a lot of 20/20 second guessing about alert and awareness, even though nobody in their right mind was going to put firefighters in the front of that, of those flames. So what we want to do is really have some locally based planning. You don't want to hear about your kind of planning from the top down. I don't want EPA or FEMA or somebody like that telling me what kind of planning needs to occur in a local community. And the commission is not going to tell you what your LEPC for sure should do. Will support you in whatever the LEPC wants to do, and does these kind of meetings and chats all the time to emphasize that. We want LEPCs to be engaged in community awareness and public involvement writ large. So they do education, they involve the community in hazard and risk analysis, and the last thing that motivated us to really take this tact a couple of years ago is a growing realization that there is a liability problem for local emergency planning. Because there is, in fact, a civil right, well recognized, for adequate planning. It's not process, but planning. And that grows out of the Katrina, Superstorm Sandy events, where you had emergency plans, but they didn't work very well. People made the case in those situations that, well, you didn't educate the public about what the plan was. You didn't talk to the public about what the expectations were. The public didn't know what the plans were. And so when people ended up on their rooftops, that was found to be a civil rights violation, because there was an assumption that if you told people to evacuate, they would, without ever having any engagement with the community in terms of whether that was true. So we think that, frankly, LEPCs are a really good place to put the planning process because of the community engagement factor. It's not the sort of thing that commissioners can do. It's not the sort of thing that emergency managers can do. It would consume a lot of time and energy, especially since it's a non-regulatory function. So in order to avoid the liability, we think LEPCs are really crucial. So I mentioned the civil rights lawsuits. There's also the Americans with Disabilities Act that applies to emergency planning. The expectations out of the federal government on the ADA for emergency planning are onerous at best. The good news is, from an enforcement litigation point of view, if you get caught trying, you generally don't have a problem. It's communities that ignore the obligations and don't have any kind of effort to engage the community that end up getting in trouble and getting sued successfully. We have been preciously close to 2-3 counties in Colorado, mostly on the Eastern Plains, being sued for civil rights violations for inadequate emergency planning. In all those cases, that was very much based on not engaging community members that were non-English speaking, mobility issues, access and functional needs, people that didn't have access to the internet and otherwise. The solution is not trying to fix all that. The solution is engaging those people so they understand what the emergency plans are, where the capability gaps are, and what the community's expectations are of them. And we're not going to fix all this by causing counties to spend tons of money. We're not going to fix all this by imposing obligations on firefighters and others. But we need to create a process so that everybody's sort of on the same page in terms of expectations and capabilities. That's the critical function. So, LAPCs collect hazard data. They collect it now. They can collect it from a whole variety of facilities. They also collect information on transport of hazardous materials through commodity flow studies and things like that, and there are grants available to do those. Tier 2 data, don't get too hung up on Tier 2. I mean, that was Congress coming up with a name for something. What it is, it's just an inventory report. There is free software for facilities to use to fill it out. It doesn't require a lot of detail. It requires the name of the chemical, quantity, sort of maximum amount on site. LAPCs across the state use that authority to ask for information well below what EPA's thresholds are. EPA's thresholds are 10,000 pounds typically. I think we all understand that what can be hazardous to a firefighter at 2 o'clock in the morning can be 2 pounds, just depending on the nature of the event. So depending on what the chemical is and depending on the community situation, EPA's regulations provide that LAPCs can ask for pretty much a complete inventory. That's, for most places, too much. But it also means that you can ask for specific kinds of inventory. And a lot of LAPCs will make requests at levels like 10 pounds, 1 pound. We have a number of LAPCs that do 100 pounds. So it's pretty common to ask for additional information from facilities so you know what kind of chemicals are there. We want to have an expectation as a commission that there ought not be places in town, in the community, where the firefighters or law enforcement folks don't know what's going on, what the hazards are if they have to respond there. Are there chemical hazards? If it's on fire, what kind of protective equipment do I need? What am I might be exposed to? It's a matter of making sure everybody comes home and is protected. We don't want to put people in harm's way. So we're not going to tell a facility they can't have it, but it's handy to know what it is so you can plan for it and know what the expectations are. There was an incident in the Detroit area not long, actually the last couple of days, where a facility that was storing little butane canisters for vaping products hadn't reported anything. And because the fire department and others didn't know what was going on at that facility, it just burned to the ground. Just nothing but ashes. So that's an unfortunate thing. We want to work with facilities to protect their property, help provide them appropriate emergency services, but it is a two-way street. It's important to know what the risks are in those cases. All right, there are some nifty FEMA publications that make it brutally clear that local governments, in other words, you guys, the elected officials, are in fact responsible for having a planning process that satisfies civil rights. It talks about information being accessible to all the community members and really look at what kind of hazardous materials risks are in the community. FEMA also put this out for elected officials, basically saying that you need to establish a core planning team that is a local emergency planning committee. It should incorporate people from all across the community, people with access and functional needs, non-English speakers and others, through various kinds of outreach, through faith-based groups or otherwise, in a number of ways to do this. But your objective ultimately is some sort of equitable and comprehensive preparedness and response program that's what's necessary to satisfy the civil right. That's process, it's not an endpoint. You never really get there, but you want to get caught trying in order to avoid issues. I found no case, enforcement action, or civil case in which a community that had an LAPC was doing a lot of outreach ever was successfully sued for these kind of things. Whereas there are tons of cases where communities that didn't have been successfully sued and found to have violated folks' civil rights, resulting in civil judgments. And as a commission, we don't want to see that happen. So the process is pretty straightforward. What are the risks in the community? That will vary from community to community. It'll be transportation issues, there'll be natural hazard issues, there will be any variety of hazardous materials things. And then we want to look at what the community capabilities are, and that's from a broad voice. I'm not talking about fire trucks, you know, how many officers there are on the street or that kind of stuff. I'm talking about what does the public know about these risks. If we tell people to shelter in place, which is a common thing that's done in hazmat incidents, do people have any idea what that means? Much less the ability to do it. If we tell people to evacuate, can they? Do they have any idea where to go? If we're going to put out emergency alerts, will people receive those? Are we using just one alert mechanism? Are we using, you know, what options do we have to do emergency alerts so that the public can take action? All that is part of assessing what the capabilities are. And then we're going to try to compare risks to capabilities. The idea being is we want to identify where the gaps are, and every community has hundreds of them. There are plenty of space between what would be nice to be able to do and reality. So the planning process is basically going to be, I want to fill capability gaps. So for an LEPC, NASPO Group and others came up with sort of these golden rules. What are the risks? Educating the public and businesses, especially small businesses, about what can happen to you and what their obligations are as a member of the community. If you walk down Main Street and ask people, do they have a first aid kit? Do they have a flashlight? Do they have the ability to shelter here because of a terrible storm? You know, what can they do? What are they capable of doing? And how can we improve those kind of things? Because there will be tons of gaps. And from an LEPC point of view, we want people to really work hard to get people to participate and cooperate, have very high expectations of public participation and public awareness of the risks, a sense of responsibility within the public. We have walked a long ways away from that, especially after 9/11, primarily because we didn't want to talk to the public about what the risks were. Okay. And as a result, people have this sense from TV and otherwise that they're going to get rescued. You know, here comes the fire department, here comes law enforcement. They've got it. We'll be fine. Everything will be like it was next day, even though we full well understand that's not remotely the case. So the other good thing about being on an LEPC in this state is that we create broad immunity for people that are members of LEPCs, that are members of incident management teams, citizen emergency response teams, medical reserve corps. We protect fire protection districts, volunteers of all sorts of sizes, shapes and sizes, from any kind of liability associated with participating in this kind of work. Okay. General Assembly did that very much because we didn't want to have an impediment to community people participating in planning activities. Okay. The process for creating an LEPC is really very straightforward. Somebody, frequently the emergency manager or others, will send a roster of LEPC members into the commission, and then we bless that. Okay. And we ask that LEPCs send us a roster about once a year, just to keep it up to date. You can amend it anytime you turn around. The statute talks about the sort of people that ought to be on an LEPC, but quite frankly, from the commission's point of view, if you can get somebody to come to more than one meeting and not throw a chair, they can be a member of an LEPC. Very straightforward kind of thing. Anybody can participate. There's nothing confidential that occurs in an LEPC meeting. There's no secret stuff. There's no recipe for disaster. All that kind of stuff comes through other that kind of information is available to the LEPC, but most LEPCs don't spend a lot of time and energy with it. There's a free software package developed by EPA called Cameo that allows you to manage the data, look at the potential impacts from transportation or other incidents, and again, that is free to the LEPCs, and I know here you guys have got that. So we protect people from liability, so there's no impediment to participation. In fact, there are a lot of advantages. Recommend that a lot of volunteer groups put their members on the local emergency planning committee to get them this kind of protection, because it's otherwise not available. So we have some LEPCs, say in the San Luis Valley, that have 40 or 50 members because they're doing their volunteer ambulance groups, they're doing their search and rescue folks, they're doing a variety of other community volunteers on an LEPC in order to obtain the liability protection. So it's a pretty big incentive to be a member. And that essentially is it. I'd be happy to chat any questions, chat about any questions you've got.
Off the top, or?
Just kind of the general things that you talked about, like chemicals and hazards and things like that. We don't have any of those kind of manufacturing facilities. The only chemicals that we have in the county really are propane, because we heat a lot of houses with those, and weed control chemicals. And I'm trying to be a little bit silly
There will be plenty of weed control chemicals, I agree.
Yeah, and the other one is that, if there are chemical issues, there'd be ones that are being transported through the county, not for the county or whatever, but, so where I'm trying to go with this, and like the disaster problems that you talked about, in this county, at least historically, it's been mostly weather related. So what I'm trying to get to is, what are you asking us to do?
No, I'm just asking you to support the ongoing function of the LEPC here, because, in fact, you have plenty of chemicals that can injure a firefighter or a deputy sheriff in the middle of the night. We're not talking large quantities. I'm not talking about refineries and things like that. I'm talking about people that sell household chemicals and have 2 pallets of something in the back room. Talking about facilities that perform a variety of more minor industrial kinds of activities. People that handle pesticides, people that handle other kinds of ag chemicals. Those risks exist in the community and may have an impact depending on what's going on in the community and the time of year, but it's not necessarily the big manufacturing folks we're talking about. I mean, some of the most nasty facilities in the state are in fact folks that have fairly small quantities, but of very, very nasty things. And they use them in whatever their business is or whatever kinds of activities they're engaged in, but they may not be manufacturing anything to speak of, and they may not be refining petroleum and stuff like that. So you have a variety of things that are quite capable of killing and injuring responders if they have to go to that facility. That would be nice to know about. So do you have proposed facilities here that may handle a lot of hazardous chemicals? Hydrogen, things like that? Do you have other kinds of people that are handling a variety of solvents and other kinds of stuff? That stuff's ubiquitous in the business community, especially amongst small businesses. And if they have an accident, they have a fire, they're going to punch up 911, they expect something to happen. Okay? And I want to make sure that the volunteer firefighter or the sheriff's deputy showing up on these scenes in the middle of the night understands, eyes open, what they might be walking into. So it's not large quantity stuff, but supporting the LEPC is as much about community preparedness from the individual point of view as anything. Okay? It's not about trying to regulate a facility. It's about what the community is going to do in the face of disaster and emergency. It's getting people tuned into what the risks are in the community and what kind of steps they should take as individuals to protect themselves and their families.
We're talking today a lot about risk to firefighters, first responders. Did we invite them to this meeting?
No, I did not. So a little bit of a history that I think paints a little bit of context for everyone. LEPC here within Elbert County used to be active back in previous emergency manager days. And obviously we've had some turnover, some change, a lot of growth within the county. This get-together, I think, is an opportunity for us to expand upon the opportunity to re-engage the LEPC for Elbert County and its citizens and the responders. The responders are aware of what an LEPC is. They were a part of it previously within Elbert County, talking several fire districts. Law enforcement has a vague familiarity. Get various levels of engagement from them and including the public. Our goal is to make it a successful engagement, really be able to include the public, re-energize it with the emergency responders, especially with companies such as our oil and petroleum produce, and be able to have them come to the table, answer questions to the citizens about safety. And so what are your mechanisms in place? What do you have in terms of safety for your personnel? How well engaged are the fire districts on the front end? Do they know, the hazards? Speaking of Mr. Gablehouse's comment that they're stepping into, and how do they go about addressing those? Is a single fire district able and willing to address, the concerns of those oil wells on the north side of the county, et cetera? So coming back to your question, sorry, Bart, they are aware of what an LPC is. They have had some exposure in the past. So this is more of an exploratory, I think, for us, just internally as a county team as much as anything, so that we could recirculate. This is something that's been done in the past. We want to re-energize it, and we want to be able to make sure everyone has an understanding of the function of an LEPC and how it can benefit Elbert County.
Well, and the reason I asked is we're talking about a lot of these issues, which I'm pretty sure fire districts already do. They know, what businesses are generally going to have the potential for, a gas cloud type scenario. They have specific training, what they're prepared for, what they're not prepared for. Would be kind of nice to be able to perhaps pick their brain at something like this. So that's the reason I was asking. And the second question that I had was something near and dear to my heart. We're talking about liability, and we're talking about Katrina cases. Do you have specific citations on those cases? I can tell you I've done a lot of research on Katrina, and we're talking about different governments that have their own ambulance services, their own fire districts even, or fire departments, and that bears into those issues quite a bit, as opposed to how we're set up out here in Elbert County. And so I'd love to kind of take a look at that, those specific cases where it's talking about civil liability, because I think there's, in general, we're talking about, well, you need to do this to avoid liability. I think it's probably a little more nuanced than that, and I think there's a lot of differentiators that I'd love to take a look at with regard to that particular statement related to liability.
Yeah, sure. As you probably recognize, a large number of these cases end up with insurance defense. And insurance defense loves to settle things rather than take them to trial. But there are plenty of actual decisions that have occurred. You've had litigation, especially in the aftermath of things like Superstorm Sandy, where federal judges have handed down scathing opinions based on the inadequacy of the emergency planning. I don't want to put anybody in the position of thinking that the primary motive to do this is to avoid civil liability for civil rights violations. What I want to do is put in your head the idea that what we want to protect community members by creating awareness of what the hazards are in their community, so that they're in a position to take enlightened self-help steps to protect themselves. I want to make sure we're putting information in the hands of first responders so they can protect themselves. You're probably correct. A lot of fire departments have a pretty good take on what's going on, but whether or not the community knows that, and whether or not the community has reasonable expectations on what the fire departments can do, or reasonable expectations on what law enforcement can do in a community, what I find is that's typically not the case. There are definitely mismatches in terms of what people think is going to happen versus what will happen in certain events, depending on storm scenarios, weather, you name it, a whole variety of factors. I don't want fire departments and law enforcement to get criticized in 2020 hindsight, when a lot of that can be fixed by upfront awareness and education in terms of capabilities. I don't want to measure success at a fire department or a law enforcement agency or emergency management by the last bad day. I want to create a situation where people understand where there are holes in capability and what role they can fill to help fix those holes in capabilities. So I just pulled up the latest list of information on facilities that are filing chemical reports now for Elbert County. That is probably not remotely all of them that should be. And beyond that, you have a large number of facilities that present risks to responders, depending on the situation, that aren't up there because they don't have large quantities. So it's not just the large quantity guys. I mean, frankly, what I find is people that manage large quantities of chemicals usually understand those risks pretty thoroughly, and they're usually pretty safe. Okay? It's the smaller enterprises that aren't as familiar with the communities or with the chemicals and don't necessarily understand what the risks are, where you don't have, well-trained employees that can avoid those risks and get themselves exposed. So there's a universe of facilities out there and businesses that present risks to the community, primarily to the first responders, but also the neighbors, that it would be handy to know something about. I'm not going to regulate them. I'm not going to tell them they can't do it.
Okay. Shane, you said that we once had an active, do we know who was participating or what? Do we had an LEPC that's no longer active?
Yes, sir.
Was it chartered? Do we know, do we have any documentation of what they were doing, how they were doing it? Benefits were...
They were holding public forums. My understanding is Alex Jakubowski was doing it intermittently. I know Corey Stark had started it and had it going consistently. We do know the fire districts in various levels were actually engaged, and they had that public element. With regards to official chartering, I don't know if it necessarily was, but Aaron and I are shoring that up to be able to do that where we have it official, if that is the direction we move.
What would, I guess that would have been useful is, what do you envision such a committee consisting of, and what would be their charter, and, I'll just throw on, a lot of the things that seem to be mentioned here would have been useful to have. We do have a medical emergency planner in public health. It would have been nice to have them here as well, but I think, there's been a huge effort in planning and updating plans. We certainly want to make sure that, communication of those plans should always be part of what we're doing. So I'm just kind of curious, what do we see as the gaps right now? What does this committee fill? And I'm a little hazy on FEMA gives you authority for something non-regulatory. Is this just manpower to pick up the phone and say, hey, what you got? We'd like you to share information. If you don't want to, that's fine. Are we stepping outside of what should be the realm of fire districts? I'm concerned about stepping in and creating liability by overstepping what a county in this structure is supposed to be doing. I think the coordinating role of an OEM is huge and broad to start with, so I'd kind of be interested in your thoughts on where are the gaps, what are we trying to fill?
Sure. I can speak to the gaps and the vision, but I'd like to start with Mr. Gablehouse addressing, I think, that FEMA and that crossroads and overreach potential.
Yeah, what FEMA's doing in the two publications I showed you, plus a whole bunch of others, is simply restating what opinions are of federal courts of appeals and trial courts in terms of the civil rights liability associated with the planning process. Like I said, I'm not trying to put fear in terms of you're going to get sued tomorrow. That's not the point. All that really reflects, the civil rights liability reflects, is the idea that planning for emergencies on an all hazards basis should include all the community, all the various community members who are going to be touched by the plan. All emergency plans have expectations in them. They have expectations that people will receive alerts and warnings. They have expectations that people will follow directions. And whether or not those expectations are real or not,
they haven't met our people.
Yes, and And so the planning process is about trying to close the gap between reality and expectations, okay? We want everybody to be safe. We want our communities to be safe. We want to be able to recover from natural disasters. We don't want firefighters killed and injured, okay? So it's a matter of sharing information with stuff. In terms of creating liability, no, we're not undertaking any duties here from a legal sense that don't already exist. Okay, the duty to do adequate emergency planning exists. Okay? Whether or not you're doing it is in the eyes of the beholder, and what I can tell you is, if in fact there is an effort being made to engage the community, you do not see litigation. You don't see people, even if they're annoyed as hell about whether or not it's adequate, okay? You don't see successful litigation. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Department of Justice takes complaints from community groups about emergency planning, like your evacuation shelters aren't adequate and things like that under the ADA. What the Department of Justice will do is they will sue communities that they think are not making an effort. And there are a couple thousand communities in the country that are under consent agreements with the Department of Justice where they're supervising emergency planning because they don't think those communities are making an effort. But you do not see cases where the Department of Justice has sued people and sued communities when an effort's being made, even if you have a whole lot of annoyed folks that want to say that the county's not putting enough resources into it. Department of Justice, and certainly not the Commission, is not going to come out here and tell you you need to be spending more money on X, Y, or Z. Okay? Reality is reality. You have whatever your resources are or whatever your resources are. The question is, do the individuals in the community have enough information to understand the risk and therefore what they should be doing to protect themselves and their families? And that's the nugget here. So I think as a practical matter, it makes a great deal of sense to be able to say, yeah, our citizens should know what the emergency services are going to do in this community and what they're not going to do. I don't create liability by not having adequate emergency services based on somebody's opinion of what adequate ought to be. That's not the law of the land, and there have been plenty of people who have attempted to litigate over you don't have enough fire stations or enough firefighters or things like that. And those cases don't go anywhere. Okay? That is a budget reality or otherwise. Nobody's going to force the county to increase taxes to pay for something, okay, just because somebody thinks there ought to be another fire station or another fire truck. On the other hand, it does make sense for the community members to understand what those limitations are so that they understand, you know, we avoid situations like occurred up before Collins a few years ago. We had a woman talking to a 911 operator as her house burned down around her from a wildland fire, who was arguing essentially, well, nobody told me to evacuate. And of course, the answer to that is, well, that's common sense, but it's neither common nor sensical. You know, we have not created appropriate expectations if people don't know they need to act to protect themselves in the face of fire. Okay. You know, we have not, you know, that's really the point. So I don't think we're not creating a liability here. In fact, by statute, we're protecting people from any sort of sense that we are by protecting them by being members of an LAPC. I think that's an important thing to offer as a benefit for participation. But short of that, it really is very much a matter of making an effort to involve everybody who's covered by the emergency plan, which is, of course, everyone.
So with that, I want to jump in on that covers everyone. We have over 1,800 square miles. Does one of these organizations cover the entire county? Because as we pointed out, there are certain areas where risk may be higher with the drilling in the Northwest versus hazardous transportation on our highways that doesn't affect everybody either. So how do you try and segment that, or is it something that encompasses everybody, and then you have the risk of people, well, I'm not involved with that, so I'm not even going to pay attention and miss what could affect them?
I mean, the commission will approve anything you want in terms of structure. So we have plenty of places where you've got LEPCs within a county, so you have a county LEPC, and then you may have a community LEPC within that. We have portions of counties that are different LEPCs, and we have, especially if you get down in the southern, in the San Luis Valley, you end up with combined counties in one LEPC.
Yeah, just so I'm tracking, there's a state commission that charters, or what?
State Commission approves two things. One is the planning district for the LEPC, and the second is the membership.
And with that approval comes access to free software, is that what I'm hearing?
Well, with that approval comes liability protection. The access to free software and other things is a resource that the commission helps, make sure we educate LEPCs about. So we provide a lot of information to LEPCs about where to go get things, what grant programs are available to them, and otherwise. The commission does not run grant programs. We do not have a budget in that regard. We put on a conference once a year for LEPC members to attend. It's educational in nature.
I'm kind of interested to hear from you, Shane, sorry. What do you think the gaps are? What do you think one such body would look like within the county?
Sure. So, as Mr. Gablehouse spoke to, in particular, emergency management really ties into a lot of this because we're very systematic. Last year, we completed the hazard mitigation plan for the county, which was over 5 years due. We completed our SEPA, our Colorado Emergency Plan Preparedness Assessment, which measures our capabilities. That is very consistent with the intent of an LEPC, and that it's collaborative. We work with our stakeholders, our agencies, and we go collaboratively, what are our gaps? What are our capabilities? And then those documents help us inform. With regards to the LEPC, while Mr. Gablehouse has spoken a great deal about Tier 2 data and such, it's also an opportunity to speak with community members about other concerns, which include natural hazards, etc. The Planning Commission, to answer your question about how I envision it, is it would be something that would be, unless you all prefer something different, emergency management has typically facilitated the conversation, brought together the opportunity to meet with the community and the emergency responders. The feedback from the fire district says there is an interest, it was valuable, they do appreciate it, and there is an assumption that they do know everything there is to know within the community about chemicals, potential hazards, safety mechanisms, processes by businesses, etc. So it helps them have more informed situational awareness, and therefore informs their processes and their safety measures on how they want to be able to respond to a particular facility. Of course, with our fire districts, as you all know, we have various levels of capabilities, 4 of them being truly volunteer, and then the other 3 still rely on volunteer support. So with this various levels of capabilities, what the Planning Commission, I should say, does is it truly helps support them being informed about what's out there, how other fire districts are handling it, and then they work together to be able to have an understanding of how they can keep each other safe and the community safer. I think all in all, our initial game plan was to, provided this is the direction we want to go, aim for a biannual opportunity to get together and market the opportunity for the community to be able to come in and meet with the response agencies, be able to determine any Tier 2 business owners who might be a good representative to come to the site and be able to share with the public, these are the safety mechanisms we have in place, etc. And then get information from the public about what are their interests, what are their concerns, how does that align with the formal documents that we've completed as an emergency management agency, say, here's where we see gaps as a community, and with regards to the response community, what are your all's concerns and gaps? Let's collectively address those and have an opportunity to as Ms. Gable has said, I think educate and come together to have a better understanding, a more informed understanding of what's realistic.
So what would the structure of something like that look like? Is it, are the responding agencies, the partners you work with all the time, part of this committee? Is this a committee of citizens doing something else? Is it, I guess I'm
Of what it looks like formally? Sure.
lost as to where this is outside
I think Mr. Gablehouse,
the
sure.
scope of your duties, and I'm not.
No, I understand. Yeah, absolutely. Because we want to stay in our lane as well, absolutely. There are a couple different models, and Mr. Gablehouse, I think, can elaborate on that. We had some good questions on the front end going, does the Board of County Commissioners formally adopt this? Does it need to be recognized? Does it not need to be? What are the benefits? What are the pros and cons? And to that, I'm going to let him speak because it does vary from one LEPC to the next. There are some emergency planning commissions that are also regional, where it's multiple counties coming together, and their format looks a little different.
Thanks.
We have every model you can imagine across the state. We have LEPCs in which the commissioners are very involved, and we have LEPCs in which the commissioners are not very involved. They will typically have as members first response agencies, emergency management, law, fire, libraries, schools, businesses, small businesses, PTAs, you name it, whatever kind of community group believes they have a stake in adequate community preparedness. So it's all over the map. We do not require at the commission level, the state commission level, for commissioners to take action to recommend LEPC members. We do get many commissions that do, but it's not required. We prefer to have the LEPC make sure that the commissioners are aware of what they're doing, when they're meeting, what their membership looks like, what kind of projects they're working on. If, for example, they may be working on commodity flow project in a certain part of the community because of concerns with people that live near areas where you may have truck accidents and rollovers and things like that. So it's highly variable, but it's community specific. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what you need to do in this community because it's a very diverse community. You know, you have wide open country and you have rapidly urbanizing areas. You have transportation corridors that involve both rail and interstate highways, and you got county roads. So I'm not for a moment going to tell you where your priorities are. What I'm going to tell you is you want to be broadly engaging from an LEPC point of view. It's handy for, just from a support point of view, for the commissioners to periodically hold study sessions where they ask the LEPC to come in and talk about what the risks are and what their work they're doing to try to fill capability gaps and what priorities they see and hear about from the community sort of writ large. So engagement, you know, the commissioners should probably be aware, but short of that, there's no formal requirement that commissioners do anything. I see commissioners looking at their emergency managers all the time and saying, yeah, go forward and do this. This is important. And, you know, it goes hand in glove with other emergency authorities that exist, designated emergency response authorities and other kinds of things, which are also here. You fit it to what you need, where you think your priorities are as a community. It's a bottom-up proposition.
You kept using the word gaps. Give us an example of one.
A capability gap. If we had a hazardous material truck turnover on 24, which is a designated hazmat route, we do not have a hazardous material team within the county to be able to respond to that in an effective amount of time. We do not have one period within the county, for starters. Our most advanced fire district has limited capability on a hazardous material response. We would have to partner with the state level to be able to address that in order to support the well-being and safety of community members and responders, et cetera.
Still, I was talking to the undersheriff actually yesterday about hazmat materials in particular. Coincidentally, He indicated that they have some sort of agreement with State Patrol on those sorts of scenarios. So sounds like we have some sort of plan in place.
And State Patrol hazmat teams consist of one person in a pickup truck with some equipment.
Infinitely more than we have.
It's
But I mean-
infinitely more, but it is not a hazmat response. And the State Patrol is highly reliant on what services they can pick up from local fire departments and others. So, I mean, and that's consistent with large areas in the state where we do not have much capacity, and you're going to be waiting hours and hours for a metropolitan hazmat team to show up. So, can you plan around that? And the answer is yes.
Yeah. I guess I'd like to, I mean, if we're going to explore this further, I think the partners that kind of signed off on our all hazard plan are probably the ones to have in the room to say, hey, what is, you know, is this more than designating that body of people as the LEPC? Or we have a tremendous history in this county of establishing public bodies that go off on their own and do their own thing.
Yes.
Based on very unclear mandate, unclear charter. So if you're feeling or sensing hesitancy, I think it's like, well, okay, we need to have a problem that we're trying to address. We need to define that. If this is simply the folks that essentially participated in the development of our all hazards plan, if designating them as a LEPC gives them a certain cachet and is helpful in focusing discussions that aren't happening already, I'm still kind of, I'm personally not clear why, what this body provides that isn't already inherent in the ongoing coordination that we do have. If it's the ability to call a meeting and give it a name, if that's helpful, that still needs to be scoped. So that is helpful, and that's where it goes. I'm, you know, again, if our fire districts aren't asking new businesses as part of planning processes, hey, what are you going to be doing? I mean, what are you going to have on site? I think those conversations happen very frequently within the Elizabeth Fire District. Can't speak for the others, but I'm back if we've got the public that doesn't understand plans. You know, there's a gap that can be talked about. I'm not sure if members of the public, it sounded like members of the public needed to know whether somebody had 5 gallons of acetone in the back of their nail shop or not, and I'm not sure if that was being heard correctly, or if when you said members of the public, you meant the business members of the public communicating what their needs might be. But I guess I'll step back at this point. I mean,
To the capability gap, to your question, to Shane's point, and to what Bart just said about CSP, that was a capability gap that needed to be filled. Part of my initiative was to address that. I was the one who reached out to CSP and the hazmat team and brought them into that partnership with the county. So that's a due diligence of the OEM department bringing in resources to fill those capability gaps. Not only is it a hazmat response element to it, but also something that affects, to your point, Dallas, the entire community and the entire county is pipelines. We have 5 different pipeline operators in this county. We just had a fire in El Paso yesterday, 640 acres, and one of the pipelines was threatened. They were using cutting, and that could create, it's a low frequency event, but it has a high impact. These pipeline companies have public awareness programs where they come to the LEPC specifically to deliver those public awareness messages. We've already done this. We've had connected with them. They're more than willing to come out not only to provide that public awareness element, but also training and services to our first responders and to our community members. So this is a great forum to be able to, obviously what Mr. Gablehouse is pointing to, reduce that civil liabilities aspect, but also to the promotion of what our entire goal is, self-efficacy, self-reliance, and to be able to bring the subject matter experts of things that do exist. The reporting aspect of what he showed, that's only a number. I've identified myself numerous sites throughout the county that aren't in compliance and are not reporting. So those are things that we may not be aware of. Like there's a new hydrogen fueling center for trucks coming into the county. That is a huge hazard that we would like that information to be relayed to the public, at least in my eyes and hopefully in all of our eyes, as making that a transparent understanding of what is coming into our county as it's growing extremely fast and what do we need to do to be prepared for that. So that is here. I just saw a truck the other day driving on. It's called Tesla. It is a hydrogen fuel facility. I've been working with Elizabeth Fire, the point of contact. It's a new facility that fuels hydrogen trucks and big explosive trucks. We are waiting on that confirmation. I'm working with Elizabeth Fire to have. No, it is off 86. I don't know the exact location off the top of my head, but I will have that information shortly. No, that is in the works. This was part of the meeting, and the purpose of bringing Mr. Gablehouse in here is to give us a platform to get that information. With the LAPC, we can have these request information availability to see what they're doing and hopefully do a site inspection and understand what the problems are, what are they bringing into the community that could have potential life-threatening issues associated with it.
Okay, I guess I'm back to, I think if we want to pursue this, we need to get the folks that were part of the all hazards plan together. And if it's nothing more than blessing them as a body that can ask for something versus the fire chief in the district asking and providing that information up to you. It just right now feels like an unnecessary layer, and I'm not saying there's no value in it. But I mean, you wouldn't have brought it here if you didn't see some value, but this feels a little disjointed, and that's fine. That's the way new things often are. So.
Thank you. It's new to our department, so it is something where we understand there is a potential set of gaps. We want to be able to offer it as an opportunity for the responders and the public, if that's the direction we want to be able to go and provide. The all hazards group, I just want to clarify, you're talking about with regards to those individuals who have signed off on the emergency operations plan? Is that the stakeholders? Okay, that helps clarify it for me. Happy to round that up. So
On that note, how much of a redundancy then would there be between that group and a new LE, whatever this is, with having the same roles, same responsibilities, same people?
So the emergency operations plan was circulated with the stakeholders. I individually would converse with them. We don't have a committee per se where we meet and sit and we have consistent conversations on preparedness and planning. Sorry.
Say that is an absolute necessity when you get 12 or more people signing off on a coordinated plan, that you're actually sitting down and coordinating and reviewing that stuff regularly. If that needs to be given a title, then it sounds like it does. If people aren't, I mean, is this just to get people together in a room that are they not willing? Are they, or?
No, sir, I believe they're willing. We do it informally. It's not formally, I should say.
The question I had then earlier was the makeup of the committee is approved by the state commission. Did I hear that correctly?
The membership, there's a roster that comes to the state commission that we vote on. But realistically, all that means is if you can get a group of people together that are willing to cooperate, we'll bless it. So we're not exercising any kind of control over who ends up on it. And to add on to the last comment, there are a number of counties where, in fact, they use an all hazards group as the LEPC, and they use it just as a stakeholder group of people to get together and meet routinely. They use the LEPC for that purpose, primarily because of the immunity statute and the ability to be fairly flexible in terms of what kind of people are showing up to have a chat with the emergency manager. It's important to have stakeholders for a variety of these kind of planning purposes. You can call it an LEPC, that works fine. Nobody's got time for more meetings. But by calling it an LEPC, you do provide some benefits to the people that participate.
So is the envision then would be the membership would just be different agencies, or would individuals that were interested in be part of, what is the exact makeup of the ideal LEPC?
It's basically anyone in the community, okay, that is worried about or has a potential stake in the emergency planning. So individuals, small businesses, schools, faith-based groups, any kind of, we've got some LEPCs where you've got local newspapers on them. Any variety of folks that are interested and believe they have a stake in emergency planning for the community can participate. So it's pretty much anybody that is willing, as I said before, to show up, sit in a meeting, and not throw a chair. And it's that kind of participation. So it's highly variable. It's all over the map.
Any thoughts, Sean?
Well, I guess when I look at the role of emergency management, building partnerships and stakeholder agreements, getting out in the community and learning this stuff, gathering the information, this should already be happening in my viewpoint. So yeah, a lot of thoughts right now. Basically, trying to understand how long we've known about the gaps and what the plan is moving forward into filling those gaps. I think that's all I have for now.
I guess to further the discussion, I think it'd be useful to get kind of pen on paper what is, kind of intent, purpose, structure of, at least an initial operating structure of what you think such an LEPC would do, and then we can probably huddle over that at some point. But I would have assumed that there are regular meetings of stakeholders of large multi-agency plans, because otherwise that plan is going to sit collecting dust on a shelf while people try to respond to an emergency, because they've never looked at the plan since they signed off on it. So if that's a mechanism we need to, just to make that happen, I think it's useful. I would be interested if, did we have a formal LEPC, or we just had kind of things in that direction? Because if your agency or commission chartered or approved a roster, it would be nice to have what that roster looked like in the past.
Yeah, that roster at this point is a decade old. And like a lot of communities, the wheels came off during COVID, which, is just reality, which is, why members of the commission have been doing these kind of meetings all over the states as emergency managers and others try to rebuild that process. Yes, LEPCs have bylaws, that describe sort of the function. And a lot of the function also comes out of things that are either in the federal statute or otherwise. So, and those get incorporated in the bylaws. So in fact, there is a mission. That mission really is what I essentially put up, which was, creating awareness and education on responsibilities of, just community members to be adequately prepared and understand what the capability gaps are.
It would be useful if you could point Shane in the direction of the most minimalistic toes in the water chartered opportunity that's out there, just to see.
I do have some documentation. I do have some documentation from previous LEPC rosters and agendas that we would be happy to share that I was able to discover collecting dust.
Because, if it was 10 years ago, it would have been Corey Stark. And anything that Ski was doing was probably interesting but not documented clearly.
My comment is very similar to the chairman's here, but the big thing is I like solutions, but I don't know what the heck I'm solving. And my big comment to myself is here, I want an identification of the gaps. Specifically, not hand waving.
Not the capability gaps, but the systemic or programmatic ones that we're trying to address.
I can resend the SEPA document from last year if that's a good start, because that's its whole intent is comprehensive assessment of our gaps in county. Is that?
What are hazard gap, I mean, what is the gap that this proposed body solves? If we already have it in a product, then we've solved that. So what is the gap that the LAPC fills specifically for us, not what they do in general, but for this county and our collection of stakeholders, what is the gap that this fills?
And solutions.
Yep, I think we can work to draft something up for you.
Appreciate that. I guess once more around the table, if there's anything else, I think we're good to hear. We're just kind of stirring the same information, it seems. So I appreciate you coming out, sir. Thank you. Alrighty, it's 12:12 and we are complete. Thank you, Amanda.